Well, thank you for joining me today, Taylor Martinez. I am thankful to have you on the More Than Your Age podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Taylor, you have a pretty profound story, and I really want to just thank you in advance for trusting me, and also the More Than Your Age listeners, just with sharing your life and just sharing how God has taken you from where you were to where you are now. There's been a lot, and you are very young for everything that you've experienced. So, could you just
Yeah,
share with the audience, because it is the More Than Your Age podcast? How old are you
I
today?
just turned 31.
31 years old. And Taylor, so at age 14,
hmm
you told me that you were involved heavily with drugs. How did this happen?
So, you never think it's going to be you. But I moved to Texas unwillingly. My dad was the head of HP. And so, like, oh, we're moving to Texas, and I was like, no. Rebellious teenager, and I had my first boyfriend of like 2 years. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. And so I obviously had to move there. But I went to the school and I fell in there with the wrong crowd. Like at first I was with like all the preppy kids, but they're probably still like in the wrong crowd anyway. Um
Yeah, just
on
dressed
my
differently, right?
right. On my first day, I was trying to impress this girl. She's now my best friend. Um she she asked me, she's like, "Oh, do you drink?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." Just trying to seem cool, I'm trying to make friends. And she goes, "We have a drinker." Like in the whole school cafeteria, and everybody stood up and cheered. And I was like, what did I do? And
Oh,
so
wow.
it spiraled from there. And people were like, "Oh, you know what? You're probably just like doing weed or something." But in my mind, I was like, "Oh, I'm not going to do weed. Like, weed is awful, and I stuck with that. I didn't do weed. I ended up doing like ecstasy and PCP, and like that's okay. And I don't understand my 14-year-old brain how I thought this correlation would be okay, because it's it's not. And I remember I went back to Nebraska and I stayed with an ex-boyfriend. His dad's like, "What are you doing ecstasy and like PCP at 14 years old? Like, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, just having fun." And it kind of went from there. So,
So when you went back to Nebraska, did I guess you felt comfortable enough to share with your boyfriend at the time's dad? Did you tell your family, your own family as well, or what made you feel comfortable to
uh,
share that with him?
so I realize this now, but he was kind of grooming me. Like I had no idea at the time. So I was like, "Oh, you're just an adult, who's like trying to be like my best friend. I can tell you whatever." And knowing that just makes me like feel awful, but that's, just confided in him. My parents, I think, knew nothing for a few years, but then they found out after snuck out of the house one night, and I did so many pills, and I ended up I don't want to say I got roofied, but I had something, and I fell asleep in the hotel room with two like older guys. Like that could have been my dad, and my friend just left me there in the hotel room with them.
Oh,
And I missed school the next day, but I left a note saying, "Oh, I had to go to school early to work on my final for English class, I think it was." And my parents called the school. They're like, "Oh no, she's not here." And the police got involved. Like, "Oh well, if we find her, she's arrested." And I was like, "Oh snap," because I woke up at like noon because my friend came back. She was, "Oh, why are you still here?" And I was like, "Where were you?" And so that's kind of how
hmm.
they first found out.
What how was that response? I mean, I can imagine as a parent, you're a parent now too. I can imagine how the response was, but when you were found or you came back, what was that dialogue like?
Um, I had to do a lot of cleaning. my dad was like, well, at least was she safe in that hotel room? And my friend was like, yeah, she was fine. She was just scared of getting in trouble. And I like looked at my dad and I was just like, you believed her, and it's unfortunate because I feel like my parents didn't know how to deal with that. They're like, oh, now you're going to have a bunch of chores, you're going to be grounded. But then it just escalated and I started doing meth at such a young age like that. Like it was like 17 or something. And that became my drug of choice then.
Wow.
So it just,
So when when that started at 17, um did you finish high school or did you focus on the drugs or did you do both? Like how like kind of what unfolded after that?
so luckily I finished high school. I did do both. There was, I think the last week of my senior year, I wanted to drop out so bad because I was getting bullied to the point I was crying. I wrote like a letter to my English teacher who we had in this assignment. He's like, oh, just write something. So I wrote everything that happened to me about being sexual assaulted, all the drugs. It was basically like I wrote a cry for help for someone. And I didn't get that from my teacher either. He saw that as a window being opened for him. And
Oh gosh.
yeah, and I was like, well, that's it's not good. And so I like went and I gave my dad that essay I wrote thinking they would do something. They didn't even acknowledge it. But luckily I finished high school. I just finished in the counselor's office the rest of the time.
Wow. That's a lot, Taylor.
Yeah.
That is. Yeah, I mean, you're saying like there were several times that, these things that you did, there were a cry for help and it just I mean, kind of got worse. So
Yeah.
you graduated high school. What after you graduated high school, were you still at home or did you move off somewhere or what where did you go?
So I was still at home. I attempted the college thing and it just wasn't for me. Like at 17, 18 years old, I didn't want to go because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I even did like dual credit for culinary and which I love cooking. I didn't want to do that and I even went to welding school, but that's like another story because they wouldn't let me finish because credits didn't transfer. And so I stayed at home and my family was very well off. And that's not a bad thing to be, but I was also like, oh, I can do whatever I want. I don't need a job. I don't need this. I can just go off and be with my friends and do drugs. And that's how I started like losing my friends and my family because they're like, "Oh, you're kind of crazy." It's just was not a good thing.
Was the participation in drugs like kind of from 18 to 24 was that a daily activity, a daily occurrence? Was it once a week or like kind of walk us through kind of the progression once the college thing didn't really pan out at that time?
It was definitely a daily thing. I remember on paydays, I would get like a few $100s out and I would just go buy bags of ice. Like, okay, I'm gonna go re up, and then just smoke it all through the day or through the week. And that's what I did. And I got a security job, and I had to stay up all night. I started doing it like during the job sometimes. And I don't know how did anything with doing all that.
Yeah, did people at work, do they know or have any suspicion?
No, I
No.
was very high functioning. And
Wow.
at one point, when my mom found out, she was like, "Do you even have all your teeth?" And I remember being so offended. And I was like, "Yeah, like why the heck would you ask me that?" And then I like looked back and I like looked at some of my friends. I was like, "Oh, that's why you asked me that." luckily I still have all my teeth today, and you would never know that I did any of this
Uh-huh.
stuff. But it's
Yeah.
just
Wow.
crazy.
Well, and you kind of touched it. Yeah, it is. You kind of touched a little bit about this, but you also shared this with me too, that eventually, like when you were in your active addiction, you lost your friends and your family and your job. And so how did that occur? I'm assuming it was probably a slow process, but I don't know. I'd love to hear what you want to share with that.
Yeah, it was definitely a slow process. I feel like I became more of like a hermit crab. People always say like, "Oh, you don't come out of your room anymore" and stuff. And I was like, "Well, I'm doing stuff in here that I thought was clearly better." But people, I think they noticed. They had to notice to just do that. And then my sister ended up backing into my car one day while I was home from work, and she just like wrecked my bumper. It was like falling off. I had to duct tape it back. And so she started saving money um, for it to be fixed. But I wanted my fix. So I take $20 here, $10 there. My dad had the $2 bills, that were like supposed to be worth something. Someday he had them for
Mm-hmm.
each of us when we were born. And I took all of them, and I used it to buy stuff I shouldn't have gotten. And so it just came like an active thing. And then I'd leave like baggies in my house and everything, and just started getting very, I don't want to say careless, but it was careless of how I was doing
Yeah.
it. And so my mom and dad got to the point, they're like, well, you need to stop. And so I started looking into rehabs. And I was like, well, if I go to rehab, it can't be associated with God. Like, I don't want anything to do with that, because like I was just, I had to be angry, because I was dabbling in like looking up how to sell my soul, how can I get money, how can I do this, how do people just become like super famous out of nowhere kind of thing. I need money now to support my habit. I even had like a spell book, and I was like, oh, this is so fun to do, but something was always in the back of my head. I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. And so every night after I got really high, I would pray and I would write a note on my laptop, and like a death note kind of thing, like, oh, if you're reading this, that means something happened, you know? And I was like, well, I hope
Mm-hmm.
that I'm in heaven, even though I know now, like, I would not have made it to heaven back then, because I did not know God the way I know him now.
So you touched on a few things that
Sorry.
I want to talk about because it's super serious. So one of the things that you said was that, if you checked yourself into a rehab, you didn't want it to be about God. Why at that time were you so adamant that you wanted to be somewhere that had nothing to do with God?
I think it was just like the demons inside me. They're like, oh, well, if you get right with him, then you're not going to have like us anymore. You're not going to be following your flesh. And so that's just a very scary thought, to the devil. He wants you to keep following him, but doing it in the wrong ways, kind of thing. And so if I was like, oh, God's actually the reason why I had so much grace, that's why I stayed alive when I overdosed. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have him. But I was like, oh, God has no part in this. Like, I'm just too far gone for God to love.
When you were in this season where it was, you're too far gone for God to love, but you also looked into spell books, like you said, and you wanted to sell your soul. How did you know that even selling your soul was an option? Where did you learn about these spell books, and like, how did that kind of get introduced in your life?
I used to have a friend that had like a Ouija board growing up, so it kind of started there. And then you always like watch those fun movies like Hocus Pocus on TV. You're like, oh, it's just like silly little things. And then you see like people out in the open, like celebrities, like, oh, I do this and this. And you're like, well, I want to be like them. And I think that has to be part of it kind of thing, but I also had like really bad like sleep paralysis kind of thing. And so
Mhm.
I was just like being tormented, and these like ideas just started like going into my mind. Just
Well, I mean, it was a really dark season for you for 10 years. Like
yeah.
that's a long time. And eventually there, eventually you get out of it. But how did you land there? How did that unfold? I'd love to hear you walk us through the moment, or not the moment, but just the time of getting released from that and getting released from these demons as well. Because people, I think that's a scary thing for people to talk about, especially if they don't believe in God. That demons exist and they're out there,
Mm.
and so that then they have a stronghold on you, and you were released from that. And so I'd love for you to share that.
Are you still there? Okay, you're back. So I I was on dating sites, you know, up to no good. But I had a message from my future husband, and he slowly won me over with, "Are you still there? You're lagging." Okay. He won me over with the comment, "Gilmore Girls is life," because I'm a Gilmore Girls like fanatic. And I was like, okay, I'll keep talking to you. And when we were like a couple months in, because we were long distance, he lived in Nebraska and I lived in Austin. I just had this feeling, and I was like, this is who I'm going to marry. Like, I just had like this sense of like hope coming into me. And he's like, well, I'm a really big Christian, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm Buddhist, whatever. Um, and it just kind of like grew. I started like slowly like realizing that God's kind of breaking down my walls. And then one night, my mom and dad like, you have to leave. Like, this is not working for us. You need to grow up. You know, the kick that every parent should maybe do to their child if they're on the path I
Mhm.
was on. And so I moved up to Nebraska with my dog and the clothes on my back. And I live with a friend here. And I was still dating my husband 9 months later. And we started seeing each other in person, and we fell more in love, and we got married a couple months later. And then we found out we were pregnant, and we had our first daughter. And then actually, I think during my pregnancy, before she was born, I had this dream. Have you ever seen, what's it called? The crab lady on Powerpuff Girls? Did you ever watch that show?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Well, I think it's like a picture of the devil, pretty much, like on there. But he was like, I'm going to come and take your child because that baby's mine. I was like, oh, like
Oh.
this is coming back. And so I slowly, very slowly, started giving God my faith. Just like a prayer a day, like the one my mom used to tell me growing up. And it was just like, now I lay me down to sleep. Um, and after my daughter was born, I was like, I need to pray over her. And God was slowly just leading us into the right thing. And I started telling my husband, I was like, we need to pray together as a family. I'm like, I know that you already do it, but I need to learn how. And his mom is one of the biggest Christians I know. She and her husband, they gave me a car when I first moved here, when I had nothing. They've been praying over me since the moment I started dating my husband. And so I think she also helped, break down the walls that I had so built up high. And we slowly started building it. And then in 2020, when I got really sick, I I was like almost bedridden. I just was nauseous, I was throwing up, I was just dizzy, just like the whole works, and I couldn't even eat chicken anymore without having like a weird like reaction to it. And I already have like POTS syndrome, and so it's like posture orthostatic tachycardia. So I already have like a fainting thing, like mixed in with all this mumbo jumbo, and then I'm just feeling like crap. And then COVID hit, and so we're getting all these tests kind of thing, but at like a really slow pace. And then I'm diving in more with our faith. But I went to an appointment, and the doctor's like, "You have lymphoma," and it was like that world, just like I had around me, just shattered. And I gave it all to God at that moment. I was like, okay, like you are in control. Like I'm done. I'm done trying to navigate my life because that's not helping
Yeah.
anybody. Um, so all my tests were coming back, all wonky. And then they went in for the final test to like pinpoint where the cancer was in my body, where to start treatment at. And the test came back clear. The cancer was gone. All my blood tests came back normal. I could tolerate chicken. They're like, you have 2 cysts. Like, you probably just get cysts often. And I was like, I don't get cysts at all. And I took a pregnancy test, and I was pregnant with twins. And so that would make our number 3 and 4. And it was just
Wow.
mind blowing. It was.
Yeah. Okay. Taylor, I have so many things to ask you right now. All right. We're going to get through a lot of them. All right. Question number 1. When did you stop taking drugs? Like when did that end? Was it around the time you met your husband or was that before? And kind of what was the detox process like for you there?
It was around the time I met my husband. He,
Okay.
I remember, I actually told him that I was using, and you don't want to tell some guy that you're on drugs who you're dating long distance for not that many months. You're going to scare people away. But I was like, I need to tell him. And he was like, okay, we're going to get you clean. Like, we're going to get you through this. And that was the first point. I was like, wow, a stranger is like being really nice to me. And obviously he wasn't a like stranger. I think it was a couple months in. But I remember when my parents kicked me out, I already had that thought like, oh, I'm gonna marry him. Like there's something that's telling me like that is where I need to be. And I told my parents like, well, I'm gonna move to Nebraska because my husband's there. I didn't say husband obviously, but Derek is there. And my mom's like, why
Yeah.
would you do that? And my dad was like just contemplating very quietly how dads do. And he looks up to my mom and goes, what if she marries him? Like, this might be the guy that she's going to marry. It was like he just had that same revelation that I had months prior.
Wow. Okay, and so then y'all are dating. That says a lot about him too, that he wasn't just like telling you, okay, well, I find this out by he was really an instrumental factor in helping
Yeah.
you stop. Did you go through a program or was it just like cold turkey or kind of how was that?
So I was technically I went through like an outpatient program twice. And like, oh, you can graduate, just come in and take a drug test. And I was like, okay, cool. But I failed the drug test because I was still using the entire time during that program. And so after I, kind of met him, I was like slowly using. And I think the last time I used was like a New Year's Eve or Christmas time or something. And that was the last time. And I told him about it, and he got really upset. He was like, why? And I was like, this like breaks my heart to like hurt you like this, and then I just like, I had to stop. And it's not like it was easy. I had such
Mhm.
awful cravings. To at one point, I fell on my knees and I was like, Jesus, I need your help. I need you now. And it was kind of like this, I don't know, like an explosion kind of thing, like in my mind and around me. I was like, this force field just blocking it out. Like, if I wanted to try to get it, I couldn't because those people changed their numbers. They blocked me on Facebook. Like, everybody was gone out of my life at that moment, just randomly. And I was like, oh, I'm like, wow,
Wow.
you really are doing something.
Oh, okay. So then you stop that and you have your first child and then we flash forward and you get really sick like you were sharing and the doctors say that you were diagnosed with lymphoma
Mm-hmm.
and and I kind of want to go back to this time frame too. So when this happened, um How old were you at this time?
I was 28, I think. No, 27.
Okay.
I'm
So
trying to think. I
what
was like, how
I
old
mean,
was I?
okay. Well, I guess you said 2020, so it was roughly 4 years ago. So what did they see that made them say this is lymphoma? Was it
They
what
saw,
this cysts were?
yeah, they saw like the two cysts in my ovaries, and I was like, I don't get cysts. Like, it just didn't feel right to me that that would be a cyst.
And what made you think, and maybe, well, this might be TMI. You don't have to answer this. I was going to say, what made you think to like, oh, I need to take a pregnancy test? Or it was just kind of like, just so happened that y'all wanted additional children or was it like, oh, they see two cysts, let me take a pregnancy test? Like, how did that kind of match up?
So, the crazy thing is, like, after our two girls, we were like, okay, we're done. Like, we don't need any more, kind of thing. Two is fine. I always wanted more, but I was like, whatever. We live in a 2-bedroom apartment. We don't need another child into an apartment life. And so we're like, we're done. We gave away everything. All of our baby stuff was gone because I was done. And but the feeling of having pregnancy tests and like seeing the positive, like I was like an avid taker, just because it made me feel so good. I was like, oh, God's putting life in me. And so I had like
Mm-hmm.
a big box of the ones on Amazon because you get them like $10 for like 50 or something. And I was like, okay. So I just had an extra one. And so I went and I took it and it was positive and I was like, huh. And I remember and I was like, oh, we're gonna have our third baby. That's really exciting. Just thinking. I was like, twins don't run in our family. Doesn't run in mine, doesn't run in his. And so
Wow.
when I'm doing the ultrasound, luckily I was recording this time because no one would believe it. He's like scanning. He's like, "Oh, there's your baby in there," and oh, you have two. And I was like, two? I hysterically laughed for like 2 weeks, because you just get like done processing having one and all the cancer being gone, and to bringing it back to having two, you're like, wow. So our thoughts like, we gotta move.
That's okay. That's a lot of emotions to deal with in a short amount of time because once you're told you have lymphoma, then never mind you don't, and then oh wait, now you're pregnant. Oh wait, now you have twins. I'm
Yep.
curious when they first told you about the lymphoma, where were you at with your faith at that point? Were you still kind of searching, or were you kind of more like, no, I know where I'm at right now, with what I believe.
So I was still diving in. My husband was sending me sermons while he was working. He was like, listen to this. And I was like, maybe later. It's an hour long. Like, I don't really want to listen to someone. Just let me listen to this music. And so I was like, just slowly diving in. But then the moment they said lymphoma, I was like, okay, God, I'm now all in. Like, there's no stopping it. And my husband and I actually got baptized like a month later, I think, or 2 months later. Like, we were just all in, like head over heels for Christ. And so it just like he was the tipping wheel we needed to be poured into. So it
Wow.
grew from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know you, after having the twins, I know even before that you were staying home with your kids. And,
Mm-hmm.
in dealing all of this, your life was spared multiple times.
Yes.
You're here for many reasons. And, God's not through with you yet, because like you said, just based on what you experienced just for those 10 years, with everything that you tried, like God really saved you.
Yeah.
And you move forward and you find a career path that fits you and your family as an ABA specialist, and then
Mm-hmm.
now you and your husband own a web design company. How did all of
Mm-hmm.
that unfold?
So he started getting like really bad anxiety. He was working 2 jobs while going to college full time to get his bachelor's. And so he was like, wife, I really need you to like get back in the workforce. Like I can't do it. Like my mental health is not good right now. I just really just need to focus and just get this degree. Like the last semester is always the hardest. And he's always worked 2 jobs for us. The moment that we got married, it was 2 jobs to support us no matter what and going to school. And so I'm very thankful for him because he does above and beyond. And so I was like, yeah, I'll go back, and I was like, all right, customer service jobs, like just scrolling on Indeed. And it wasn't really like standing out. I was like, I don't want to do customer service. And then I saw this listing and I was like, oh, a child entry psychologist or something. And I was like, okay, what is this? And I read more about it and I was like, oh, it's an ABA specialist, an RBT, like just starting out. And I was like, okay, this actually helps a lot because my nephew was diagnosed with autism and it'd be really cool to, just navigate that life and be able to help them, and get to know like what can help. But doing this, like getting my certification and going through the process, I realized that my daughter had autism. And so I was like, oh, snap. Like, but we need to get her help, the help that she needs now. And so without this ABA job, I would not have found out that my daughter had autism. Like, girls are hard to diagnose. They don't show like the signs that boys do because they're really good at masking their feelings and like how they're just dealing with stuff. And so it like slowly grew. And my first job when it wasn't a good company. They didn't care about you. They didn't care about the client. It was just money. And then I moved on to a second one, which I'm still at now, and it'll be 2 years this year. But they saw my worth in them. And now I'm an RBT trainer, which is one of the best things. I'm going to help other people like navigate this new school life to help, kids just thrive. Because kids with autism, they just have, the little extra sparkle. There's nothing different about them. And my husband was a stay-at-home dad, and he's like, well, I'm ready to go back to work, but I don't want to work for someone. And I was like, okay, whatever you decide, I'll help you. And he's like, I'm gonna start a web design company, so we started Divine Path Digital, and he's like, but we're putting God first in it. We're only gonna like help the people, who God brings to us, and that we pray over them every step of the way, every process through it. We go for it. And it's just one of the coolest things because we're able to meet, so many people through it. And I'm able to do this, but I'm also able to have like my candle and self-care company, and I pray over like all those products. And so it's just one of the coolest thing how God's like just pulling us together at different aspects. Like I needed my ABA job to realize that I need to help my daughter and help my kids and even help myself. It's just the most rewarding thing. Like one of my clients, he strangled his teacher on the first day of school as a kindergartner. And by the end of the year, he was putting his hands up to walk away from fights, not wanting to hurt anybody.
Wow.
And I was like, this is the most rewarding thing to go through. And I was like, it's just God like putting me in the right places at the right time to help these people, to connect with other people, but still like bringing it back to him, like with the self-care company, because you have to pour into yourself. Like you can't pour it from an empty cup. And so that's what I really like to take pride on. Like, oh, all this stuff, is natural, and God wants us to be like natural and heal our bodies, and just give back to him and give back to others. And so that's what we're kind of doing. All three just work together, and it's just the coolest experience.
Yeah, that's neat. I want to hear more about the self-care company and then your candle company too.
So the candle and self-care, it's called With Him Co. or With Him Company. So I started doing that as a stay-at-home mom. And I was like, oh, this is really fun, like doing essential oils and everything, being the crunchy mom. I really liked it. And I was like, I can do this. Like, and I started selling my products, and luckily my husband was able to make me like a website and everything. It's like now you can sell everything online. Like, you don't have to go places. I'm like, oh, word of mouth kind of thing. Like, you can reach anybody. And so it's just like, just connecting together. And so, like, all the products, they're all prayed over, they're all natural. I go through the steps to make sure everything's like what it says it is, because there's so many bad things in there these days, like even down to the candle like oil and wax that you burn. I use the coconut soy wax because it's one of the cleanest waxes to use, and it's just good to have like the clean burn so you're not inhaling like all the bad stuff. I even
Yeah. Do
try.
you make it? Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was I was gonna say I even what was I gonna say? I even try making some of my own oils. Like, I made a lilac oil scrub, and I went and picked my own lilac flowers off my in-laws' trees, and I
Oh.
infused the oils, and I made it into the scrub, and it's just wonderful, and it's best properties.
Wow. Okay, because I was gonna ask you, do you craft your own products and own candles, or do you outsource them?
No, I do everything in my house. That way I can oversee everything, pray over it every step of the way. That way I can be sure that my customers and friends and family are getting like the best products that they need in their house and in their body. Something that they can trust, because there's so many companies like that you hear about that are not good for us, that are like just adding additives and stuff, and I don't want that. Like, even for my own kids, I was like, you don't need to be taking a bunch of medicine when I can just, give you like magnesium oil or something to like put on the bottom of your feet to help you sleep, or for, pain or anything that they're going through. And they actually really like helping me pray over my products and like help kind of mixing it too. It's just a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna definitely have to check that out. I'll put that in the show. I'll put all of your companies in the show notes too.
Thank
But
you.
I'm just thinking, oh, this would be kind of great. I want to support you and then get some gifts for people that I love and care about. And so Taylor, when we communicated previously, you told me that you were on this path to homelessness, and
Mm-hmm.
now you through just definitely God ordained, but I was just going to say, just through crazy
Yeah.
events, you're alive and you're here. And now you're a business owner at 31. When you reflect on what life could have looked like, what do you think may have happened to you if you hadn't made the decisions that you made to change your path?
I don't know if I would be here today. Like, I was just going down such a sad road and not caring about anything I did to my body. And so it just, I don't think I would be here. I don't think it would have been looking the same. Because I know some people are like, oh, well, you had such good potential, but you didn't care, kind of thing. Or you didn't just, I don't want to say like you didn't just give your life to Christ, because some people can be like really offended, but if they only knew what he does for us, the way that we've experienced it, because I've seen people still like not doing well in their life after they started doing this stuff, because they're just accepting like, oh, my life sucks, that's what it's going to be. My parents' life is like this, so my life has to be like this too. It's just the generational curses that I'm declaring to break over myself and my children and their children's children. I'm trying to think, what was the other part of your question?
Just what do you think your life would have looked like had you have not made the decision to change
Yeah,
your path?
just unbelievably different. Not where I am at all.
Yeah. It's a powerful story. I mean, just thinking of what you went through and like the relationships that were lost, and then eventually your parents, or parents saying like leave, get out, and then you meet this guy in Nebraska, which kind of a full circle moment for the listeners. I don't know if they realize that you moved to Austin from Nebraska and had a boyfriend back there too. So it's like
Yeah.
you're always drawn back. Nebraska is maybe a safer place, but is home for you, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things, Taylor, too, is that like I'm so passionate with this product with this podcast as being more than your age. Like you're more than a 31-year-old businesswoman. You're more than a mom at 31. You're more than somebody who was addicted to drugs from age 14 to 24. You're more than that. You had to overcome like some really hard life lessons and situations that happened, and now you're on this other side right now. And the my last question I want to ask you, which is the question that I ask all of my guests, and I would love to hear what you would have to say. If you could encourage one woman who feels blocked to pursue a dream or a goal that she may have based on her age or a life circumstance, kind of like in your situation as well, what would you tell her?
To grab the chisel, because you gotta just keep having faith and breaking down that wall. I saw a post the other day and it said, the past like God has for us, it's not immediate. Like Joseph was sold into slavery. He was
Mm.
sold by his brothers. He had all this bad stuff, and that wasn't where Joseph was going to end up. God told him that he was going to end up with people bowing down to his feet. And that's where the path led, but he had to go through all those experiences to build up his testimony, to have all the faith. And so just you have to keep your faith, you have to keep going no matter what, because this isn't the end of your story. It's just a part of your testimony, which makes his story so much greater for us.
I like that. It's like that's a little nugget about what you said about our paths. That yeah, that was good. That was good. Well, Taylor, where can people find information about you or your companies?
So we have on my social medias, we have like withhimco.com and then divinepathdigital.site for our company things. But you guys might also see me. I'm now a YouTube or social media influencer, just spreading the gospel on all major short platforms, I guess. And so I'll always have my stuff like posted there as well. But it's just a lot of fun, just reaching people with his word anywhere we can.
Yeah, it's huge. What did you say your personal YouTube and all the other socials were?
So it should be under Tay Martinez.
Tay Martinez. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. I'll link that in the notes too. Well, Taylor, I really appreciate you jumping on with me today on the More Than Your Age podcast. You just were very vulnerable and honest. And I know beforehand, I think it was beforehand, you just said, I need to get my story out there. Like people need to hear this, and they do need to hear this. And especially something that you said at one point, you said that you felt when you didn't want to go to this rehab that had to deal with God just because you felt like you know, you you had done too much. And that's kind of the whole thing. For people who are listening who aren't Christians, as Taylor and I both are Christians, we believe that nothing that we have done in our lives are too great enough for God to love us. Like I was just talking with my kids about this the other day. I gave them an example of okay, when you make a bad decision, like when there was this little boy that was being a bully, or if you hit your sister, they're bad decisions right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, does God still love you? Yes. Do I still love you? Absolutely. And so when you mentioned that earlier, it's like, yes, it's really hard to believe that when you're in it, but he does. He cares about you so much.
He definitely does, and it's God's grace, and it's his timing. Like people are like, oh well, why does all this stuff like keep happening? Like if we're in the end days, like so many years for us, like a million years for us could be like one day to God. And he's giving us like all this patience, all of his grace, so all of his children can find their way to him. And that's what we have to remember. Like, even if we can change one person, we are doing a good job in Christ.
Absolutely. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.